My son thought I didn't notice when his hand slipped something into my drink. But I've lived long enough, seen enough, and raised in myself to recognize the smallest change in a man's expression. His fingers trembled just slightly as he reached for my wine glass, then set it back down with a smile that was far too forced to be casual. He thought his old man had gone blind with age, deaf to whispers, and too trusting to suspect. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Before we dive deeper into this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from right now. Your support means more than you know. It all started 3 nights before Christmas. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that seeps into the walls during winter. I was sitting at the kitchen table going over bills and wondering if I could splurge on a nicer gift for my granddaughter this year when the doorbell rang. 3 sharp bursts, impatient and hard. I pushed my chair back, my knees aching from years of construction work, and opened the door to find my son, Michael, standing there with his wife, Denise. Their faces told me immediately this wasn't a social visit. Michael barged in first, barely muttering a greeting, his coat still dripping from the cold rain outside. Denise followed, her eyes sweeping across my home like she was cataloging its worth. The hardwood floors I had laid board by board, the shelves I had built with my own hands, the photographs lining the mantel. Suddenly, I felt like a stranger in the very place I had built for my family. "Dad, we need to talk," Michael said, pacing near the fireplace. His tone wasn't a request, it was an order. He started in about money, about how my house was just sitting there while he and Denise struggled with bills and 2 kids in a cramped apartment. Denise chimed in with her sharp, cold voice, saying it was unreasonable for me to keep a house this size to myself when they were barely making it. My chest tightened. This wasn't the son I raised, the boy who once helped me install those same shelves and laughed when we made mistakes together. This was a man driven by greed, by pressure, maybe even by Denise's influence. I tried to reason with him, explaining that this house was my life's work, my history, and that it would all pass to him in time. But that wasn't enough for Michael. He wanted it now. "Sell it, Dad," he snapped. "Move into one of those retirement places. You're being selfish." Selfish. That word stung. I'd spent decades working 2 jobs to give him the best education, to put food on the table, to help him when he fell short. And now he stood in my living room, spitting that word in my face. I told them to leave. Quietly, firmly, but without bending. Michael's face hardened, his jaw set like stone. "Fine," he said, his eyes burning with something I didn't want to recognize. "But this isn't over." He stormed out, Denise trailing behind, and the slam of the front door echoed through the house like a gunshot. I stood alone in the silence, my hands trembling as I reached for the old photograph of my late wife, Margaret. Her smile in that frame had always steadied me through storms, but tonight the storm came from my own blood. I sat down, clutching that photo, whispering to her memory. "What happened to him, Maggie? Where did our boy go?" The walls seemed to close in, and I felt smaller in my own home than I ever had before. Later that night, I opened the small safe tucked behind her old dresses in the upstairs closet. Inside were neat bundles of cash I had saved over years, $10,000, scraped together from small sacrifices and quiet discipline. I counted it twice, imagining handing it to Michael as a gesture of peace, of love. Maybe then he'd see that I wasn't his enemy, that I wanted to help. But the next day, when I offered it, over the phone, his laughter cut me to the bone. 10,000. "Are you serious, Dad? That's a joke." His words poured like acid, telling me I was a greedy old man, a miser clinging to a worthless house. He even brought Margaret into it, saying I was worshiping a dead woman's memory instead of helping my living family. My voice cracked when I shouted back, but he only hung up, leaving me shaking in the kitchen, staring at the silent phone. I thought that was the end of it. I thought anger and words would be the worst of it. But then came Christmas Eve. An invitation arrived, dripping with apologies and promises of reconciliation. Michael and Denise wanted me to join them, to share dinner with the family, to start fresh. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe it was Margaret's voice in my heart whispering that family deserves a second chance. Maybe it was the thought of my grandchildren, Madison and Evan, whose bright eyes and laughter had always been pure. The night of Christmas Eve, I dressed carefully, wearing the navy suit I had pulled out only for the most important moments in my life. I cooked Margaret's old recipe for Christmas pudding, wrapped it carefully, and drove through the rain to Michael's house. The children met me at the door with hugs, their joy genuine. For a moment, I let myself believe it might really be a new beginning. Dinner was warm, the food was good, the laughter even felt real. But then Michael raised a glass of red wine in my honor, his smile a little too wide, his eyes a little too sharp. And that was when I saw it, the subtle flick of his fingers, the small packet emptied into my glass. He thought I didn't notice. He thought his own father wouldn't see. But I saw everything. And when he left the table for just a moment, I made my move. I switched the glasses. The glass sat in front of me, gleaming under the chandelier light, its surface trembling slightly as if it carried the weight of every unspoken betrayal. My son thought he had orchestrated the perfect trap, but he didn't realize that the man sitting across from him wasn't blind or naive. I had lived through poverty, through backbreaking labor, through nights when I didn't know if I'd make it to the next paycheck, and I had survived them all. This was just another test, only this time it came not from a world outside, but from my own blood. My hands remained steady as I pushed my fork into the turkey on my plate, chewing slowly, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Inside, though, my heart pounded against my ribs, not from fear but from the realization of how far Michael had fallen. Denise returned from the kitchen, carrying a pie in her oven-mitt hands, her eyes darting toward the glasses on the table. I caught the quick exchange between husband and wife, the small, almost imperceptible nod Michael gave her. They thought I was already trapped, that my fate was sealed in that single drink. Their act of reconciliation had been nothing more than theater, a charade wrapped in Christmas ribbon. And in that moment, surrounded by the warm smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine needles from the decorated tree, I realized I was dining not with family, but with predators. The children, sweet and innocent, knew nothing of the darkness hanging over this table. Madison hummed Silent Night under her breath as she played with the ribbon on her gift bag, while Evan tried to balance a dinner roll on his fork, his giggles lighting up the room. They were the only genuine souls here. For them, I kept my mask in place, my face calm, even as my mind calculated every second. Michael raised his glass high, his eyes locked on mine. "To family," he declared, his voice rich with false warmth. I mirrored his action, lifting the glass I had switched with his. Denise followed suit, though her hand trembled just slightly, betraying her nerves. The children clinked their grape juice cups, laughing. And then, without hesitation, Michael took a long, confident swallow of his wine, believing I had just sealed my own fate. I merely touched the glass to my lips, allowing the bitter liquid to graze my tongue before setting it back down with deliberate care. Across from me, Michael's smug grin widened, the kind of smile only a man certain of victory could wear. He thought he had beaten me, reduced me to a helpless old man with one trick. But in truth, the only man at that table who had been deceived was him. Conversation resumed with Denise asking me about old family recipes, her tone too sweet, too calculated. I played along, describing how Margaret used to make stuffing with sage from the garden, how she would hum hymns while stirring the gravy. Denise smiled and nodded, but her eyes flicked repeatedly toward Michael, as though waiting for some signal, waiting for the trap to spring. I caught Michael sneaking glances at his watch, subtle but frequent, and my stomach twisted, not with dread, but with grim understanding. They were waiting for something to happen to me. 15 minutes passed. Madison showed me a drawing she had made of our family standing by a Christmas tree, each figure labeled with love. "That's you, Grandpa," she said proudly, pointing to the figure she'd drawn with careful detail, down to the gray hair and the smile. I swallowed hard, holding back the tide of emotion. To her, I was still the hero, still the steady presence in her life. And here her father sat, watching the clock, expecting me to collapse. Michael shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie, his face beginning to lose its smug confidence. Denise's smile had become strained, her fingers tapping nervously against her wine glass. And then it began. Michael stiffened, his hand going to his chest, his face paling, as if all the blood had drained from it at once. He tried to mask it with a cough, but his body betrayed him. His eyes darted toward me in sudden, desperate panic. I leaned back in my chair, calm as stone, my gaze steady. "Something wrong, son?" I asked, my tone level, almost casual. The children froze, looking between us, their innocent eyes wide with confusion. Denise's fork clattered against her plate as she jumped to her feet, rushing to Michael's side. "Michael, what's happening?" Her voice rose in pitch, breaking through the forced politeness she'd worn all evening. Michael tried to speak, but but his words came out garbled, his tongue thick in his mouth. He reached for the table as if it could steady him, knocking over his glass of wine in the process. Red liquid spilled across the white linen tablecloth, spreading like a wound. The children gasped. Madison began to cry. I stayed seated, my hands folded neatly in front of me, my expression calm. "Maybe you should ask your husband what he put in my glass," I said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Denise's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. What are you talking about?" "I saw him," I continued, my voice steady. "I saw him pour something into my wine. But when you went to check the pie, Denise, I switched the glasses. He's been drinking his own poison ever since." The room fell silent except for Michael's ragged breathing and the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Denise stared at me, horror flooding her face, her carefully constructed mask shattered. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not true." But her trembling voice betrayed her. The children clung to each other, tears spilling down their cheeks, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the fear crawling through the room. Michael stumbled to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. He staggered toward the hallway, mumbling incoherently before collapsing against the wall, sliding down to the polished floor with a groan. Denise rushed to him, crying out his name, her sobs filling the house. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate calm. "You tried to make me the victim," I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of a lifetime. "But you've only exposed yourself." Denise turned toward me, her eyes wild, her hands stained with spilled wine. "You don't understand," she cried, her words tumbling out in panic. "We had no choice, we needed money. We were desperate." I shook my head. "There's always a choice. And you made yours." The sound of Michael's groans echoed down the hall, mixed with the children's sobs, the clatter of dishes still shaking from the chaos. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair, my movements unhurried, my mind clearer than it had been in years. "Tell him," I said, pausing at the doorway, "that a man earns respect through love, through sacrifice, through honor. Not by betrayal, not by poison." And with that, I stepped out into the cold December night, leaving the chaos behind me, the snow crunching beneath my shoes, my breath visible in the air. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The night air bit into my skin as I stepped out of that house, but I hardly felt the cold. My blood was still boiling, though not from anger alone. It was a mix of betrayal, relief, and something sharper, like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing you hadn't fallen after all. The crunch of snow beneath my shoes sounded louder than usual, each step a reminder that I was still alive, still free, still in control. Behind me, I could hear Denise shouting Michael's name, her voice cracking with panic, while the children's cries pierced through the walls of that pristine house. I didn't look back. My car sat in the driveway like a loyal companion, and when I slid into the driver's seat, the silence inside wrapped around me like armor. My hands gripped the steering wheel, steady, though my chest rose and fell in deep, deliberate breaths. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, drowning out the chaos I left behind. The drive home was long, the streets nearly deserted, Christmas lights blinking cheerfully in front yards, mocking the storm inside me. I replayed every second of that dinner, the way Michael had smirked when he thought his plan had worked, the trembling in Denise's hand, the wide-eyed innocence of Madison and Evan. The image of my son collapsing, clutching at himself with fear, was burned into my mind. I should have felt satisfaction, I told myself. Justice had been poetic. But instead, there was only a hollow ache, like something inside me had been carved out. What kind of father raises a man capable of such cruelty? Was this my failure, my punishment for sacrificing too much, giving too freely? By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the frost had thickened across my lawn, shimmering under the streetlight. My house stood tall and proud, the one constant in my life, the walls I had built with my own 2 hands. The wreath on the door swung gently in the wind, its red ribbon catching the glow of the porch light. Home. Sanctuary. I stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind me, locking out the world. The silence inside felt different now, less lonely, more protective, as though the house itself had welcomed me back, shielding me from the treachery I had just escaped. I poured myself a glass of water, staring at the reflection of my own tired face in the kitchen window. Lines carved deep into my skin, eyes weary but sharp. I should have called the police right then, reported what I had seen, but something in me hesitated. Michael was my son. As monstrous as his actions were, I couldn't quite bring myself to summon strangers to haul him away in handcuffs. Not yet. Part of me still clung to the hope that this was rock bottom, that maybe he would wake up in that bathroom tonight realizing the weight of what he'd done. Still, I knew I couldn't just leave things as they were. He had crossed a line, and lines once crossed cannot be redrawn. The next few days moved slowly, each hour stretching out like a test of endurance. I avoided the phone, letting calls ring unanswered. Once, I heard Denise's voice on the machine, frantic, pleading, begging me to call back. I didn't. I spent my mornings walking through the house, touching the woodwork, running my hand along the crown molding, reminding myself of what was mine. My evenings were quiet, the television murmuring in the background while I sat in Margaret's old chair, thinking. On the third day, while sipping coffee, I made a decision. I would change my will. It wasn't an act of spite, though some might have seen it that way. It was an act of protection, of justice. Michael had shown his true nature. He didn't deserve this house, this legacy. The grandchildren, they were innocent. They still deserved a future. And so I called my lawyer. His office smelled of leather and paper, familiar, steady. "Are you sure, Mr. Harris?" he asked as I laid out my plan. "It's not an easy step to disinherit your own son." I met his gaze without hesitation. A man who tries to poison his father for money is no son of mine. The house, the savings, they go into a trust for Madison and Evan. They'll receive it when they're old enough, when they've proven themselves. Until then, not a cent for Michael or Denise. The lawyer nodded gravely, pen scratching across the paper as he drafted the changes. By the time I left his office, I felt lighter. Not happy, but resolute. A storm had passed inside me, and now only clarity remained. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with me yet. That evening, just as I was locking up the house, headlights swept across my front lawn. A car pulled into my driveway, Michael's car. My chest tightened as I watched the silhouette of Denise climbing out, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her face pale under the porch light. Michael wasn't with her. She moved quickly up the steps, her knock sharp, urgent. I opened the door, bracing myself. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." I let her inside, though every instinct screamed against it. She stood in my living room, her eyes darting around nervously, her hands twisting the fabric of her coat. "He's in the hospital," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Since Christmas Eve. They don't know exactly what happened, but he's weak, confused. They think it was something he ate." She swallowed hard, tears pooling in her eyes. "He blames himself. He says he made a mistake. Please, Lyman, he wants to see you." I stared at her, searching her face for any trace of honesty. Was this another act, another performance designed to manipulate me? Or had Michael truly broken under the weight of his own treachery? Denise stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The children, they keep asking why Grandpa won't visit. Please, they don't understand." For the first time in years, I felt torn straight down the middle. One path led me to the hospital, to hear whatever Michael thought he needed to say. The other kept me here, safe within my walls, never looking back. The snow fell softly against the window as I stood in silence, the weight of a father's love battling with the scars of betrayal. And in that silence I knew the hardest part was still to come. I sat in my chair long after Denise left, the clock on the mantel ticking out the minutes of indecision. The house was quiet except for the wind scratching at the windows. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been, every creak in the floorboards a reminder that I was alone with my thoughts. My son lay in a hospital bed, so she claimed, and I wrestled with the question of whether he deserved to see me again. He had tried to erase me with a single glass of poison wine, but now fate had turned his cruelty back on him. Was it punishment enough? Or would seeing him mean stepping back into a trap carefully set by both him and Denise? I could not tell. But one truth rang clear in my heart. I had to protect what remained, myself, my dignity, and the memory of Margaret. The next morning I rose early, the sky outside painted in strokes of gray and pale blue. I showered, shaved, and pulled on my best coat, the wool one Margaret had bought me 2 decades ago. It was still sturdy, still fit well. If I was to face my son again, I would not do so looking broken. I drove slowly to the hospital, the city still half asleep. Snow clung to the curbs, slush hissed under my tires, and by the time I pulled into the visitor's lot, my chest was tight with the weight of what lay ahead. Inside, the hospital smelled of disinfectant and faint coffee. The lights were too bright, the floors gleaming unnaturally, and every hallway echoed with hurried footsteps and hushed voices. Denise waited for me near the nurse's station, her hands clasped, her face worn. "He's awake," she whispered, "but weak. Please don't be harsh." I said nothing, only followed her down the hall to a room where monitors beeped softly. Michael lay there, pale and shrunken, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something almost childlike, fear. When his eyes found mine, they widened. He struggled to sit up, his voice hoarse. "Dad." Just that one word. For a moment, I saw the boy he once had been, the boy who built birdhouses with me in the garage, who cheered when I taught him to ride his first bike. But then memory crashed back, the smirk, the powder slipping into my wine, the whispered conspiracies. The boy was gone. What lay before me was a man who had chosen greed over blood. "You wanted to see me," I said, my voice steady. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I made a mistake," he croaked. I thought if I pushed you, if I scared you, you'd give up the house, the money. I was desperate, Dad. We're drowning." I didn't mean for it to. His words faltered, his eyes wet with tears that may have been real or may have been another performance. I let the silence stretch, my gaze unwavering. "You tried to poison me," I said flatly. "That's not desperation, that's betrayal." His face crumpled. "Please, I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you. The kids, they need their grandfather. Don't punish them for my sins." For the briefest moment, I felt a tug of pity. But then I remember Madison's small voice asking, "Why is Daddy so sick?" and the look in Evan's eyes, wide with fear, as his world cracked open. They were innocent, yes, but Michael had used them as shields for his own selfishness, dangling them like bait to reel me back into his schemes. I leaned closer, my words sharp but calm. "You already punished them, Michael. You made them watch their father collapse at Christmas dinner. You made them see lies dressed as love. That was your choice, not mine." His tears spilled, his breath hitching. "Dad, don't leave me like this. Please. One more chance." I straightened, my decision made. "A father's love isn't endless," I said. "Mine lasted 42 years. But you've burned it to ash. The only thing left is the lesson you taught yourself. Actions have consequences." Denise covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes shining with tears. Michael reached out weakly, but I stepped back. I turned and walked out, the sound of his voice breaking behind me, calling for me, echoing down the sterile hallway. I did not stop. When I reached the parking lot, the winter sun had broken through the clouds, cold but brilliant. I filled my lungs with the sharp air, feeling it cleanse me from the inside out. Driving home, I realized something had shifted. I no longer felt the hollow ache of betrayal. I felt certainty. The house I had built would no longer be a prize dangled before greedy eyes. It would go to those who truly needed it, those who would never look at me as an obstacle, but as a man who gave everything he had. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, reviewing the documents my lawyer had prepared. I signed each page with deliberate care, every stroke of the pen a seal against the past. Madison and Evan would have their future secured when they were old enough. The rest would go to children's hospitals, scholarships, charities that would honor Margaret's generous heart. Michael and Denise would receive nothing, not out of vengeance, but out of justice. When the papers were done, I poured myself a glass of brandy, the good kind Margaret and I had saved for special occasions. I raised it to her photograph on the mantel. "I kept my promise, love," I whispered. "I protected what we built, and I protected the children in the only way I could." The brandy burned warm and steady down my throat, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. Outside, the neighborhood glowed with Christmas lights, families gathering, laughter spilling from warm houses. I sat in mine, alone but unbroken, the weight of betrayal finally lifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. I had faced the darkest part of fatherhood and chosen dignity over despair. And I knew Margaret would have approved. So if you're listening now, take this lesson with you. Family is not just blood. It's love, respect, and trust, and without those, blood means nothing. Betrayal can wound you, yes, but dignity can heal you. And sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is walk away. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what this story made you feel. Until next time, remember, actions always have consequences.